If you've been considering joining the American Homebrewers Association, now's a great time to start a membership. In the month of July, all new and renewing members can receive a free copy of Dick Cantwell and Peter Buchardt's book, Wood and Beer, A Brewer's Guide, which covers the history, physiology, microbiology, and flavor contributions of wood, as well as the maintenance of wooden vessels. Join or renew at homebrewersassociation.org with offer code WOODBOOK. That's WOODBOOK, all one word, to receive a free copy with your membership. homebrewersassociation.org. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, July 12th, 2018. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week we taste delicious sour beers in Portland at Cascade Brewing with head brewer Mike Mathis and lead blender Kevin Martin. Cascade is a bucket list brewery for sour lovers, and Mike and Kevin give us a peek behind the scenes. If you go to basicbrewing.com, you can find archives of our audio and video shows, our DVDs, our brewer's logbooks, and other Basic Brewing gear, including our tie-dye silicone pint. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Basic Brewing and find our show page on Facebook. We have a cool Basic Brewing app on iTunes and Amazon.com, and we're found all over the place where fine podcasts are served up. If you do us the favor of rating us on iTunes and maybe leaving a nice comment, they say that'll help new listeners to find us. And while you're at it, if you like the video side of things, find Basic Brewing Video on iTunes and give us a little love there as well. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing. This upcoming weekend, Steve and I are planning to get together to record more video and audio stuff. I have my Cucumber Lemon IPA and my Oak-Aged Robust Stout, or maybe it's a porter, for Steve to try on the video side. We also have a round of the Hop Sampler that we were supposed to taste in Portland around HomebrewCon, but a certain shipping company destroyed the package that had those bottles in it before it even left Northwest Arkansas. Luckily, though, I had extras here, so we will be comparing UK Fuggle, Hallertau, and Pearl. Or is it Perla? I'm looking forward to that. Steve is also working on a mead yeast sampler experiment where he fermented the same must with 3 different yeasts. So lots of fun come down the pipeline. Speaking of yeasts, our sponsors, Imperial Organic Yeast, have a seasonal strain until the end of August. It's called A30 Corporate. Corporate is a Pacific Northwest favorite and is an excellent choice when making hop-forward American-style beers. It's the go-to for brute IPAs due to its clean fermentation profile and accentuation of hop flavor and aroma. That's a style that I'd like to get into. Try that out. Middle-of-the-road flocculation and fairly wide fermentation profile make this an easy strain to work with. That's the A30 Corporate. Steve and I love Imperial Yeast, and we met up with them in Portland for their Insane in the Yeast Strain event, and you'll hear that show coming up before too long. They're fun folks, and their product is excellent. Imperial offers the highest cell count of any liquid yeast producer, 200 billion cells. My stir plate is dusty because I don't make starters anymore. I used to make starters with liquid yeast every single time, but you don't need to with Imperial, with the standard gravity 5-gallon batches. They're the only certified manufacturer of organic liquid yeast in the world. And, you know, they used to be in the little cans, but now they have a handy, easy-open pouch that works very nicely. So thanks to Imperial Organic Yeast for their support, and look for their seasonal release A30 Corporate for your hoppy beers through August. And by the way, thanks to Casey at Imperial for helping me to arrange the interview today, or this week's interview, as well as the interview with the Occidental that's coming up down the line. Very helpful. Thanks, Casey. I've been using a ton of Imperial yeast, but I deviated for a special brew this past week. Listener Frederick from Denmark sent me some Lithuanian farmhouse yeast. I think it's pronounced Simonitis. I talked about it last show. I did some reading on it, and I also followed Frederick's advice. And I brewed a no-boil beer with hops only added in the mash. I wanted to keep the IBUs, the bitterness low, to not get in the way of any lactic component that was in the yeast. Frederick also says that this yeast likes to ferment hot, so I put it in a bucket and set it on my porch, where the highs have been around 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 C here lately. The yeast took off and seems to have done well. I haven't measured gravity yet or tasted the beer, but it does smell a bit funky and tart. So I also top cropped some of the yeast to save for later use, and you can see pictures of the fermentation on social media thingies, Twitter and Instagram and such. So I'm really looking forward to how that turns out. I did my no broil. There wasn't any broiling either, but there was I did my no boil brew day with my electric brew in a bag system from High Gravity in Tulsa. Our sponsors, Desiree and Dave, and it was super easy. I did the mash as usual, using the mash mode of the Warthog EBC 130 controller. And the mash was thicker than I normally do because I wasn't going to be boiling off a lot of water. So I started off with less water in the mash. So after that mash rest, I stayed in mash mode, collected the grain, and then turned the setting up to 180 Fahrenheit or 82 C. And I held it there for 15 minutes to pasteurize the wort. It's very easy to do with that Warthog controller. Then I used my immersion chiller to chill down to 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 C and pitch the yeast and put it on the porch. I love my high-gravity electric system. You know I do. And the Warthog controller. Dave and Desiree made a new video showing the differences between their models of Warthog controller, and you can find that on their Facebook page or their YouTube channel. There are also other videos demonstrating high-gravity controllers and systems, including a couple from Steve and me, so check those out. High Gravity is a family-owned and run shop, and they're great people. You might have met them while you were at HomebrewCon in Portland, and they stand behind their products. You can find all their electric brewing systems and controllers at highgravitybrew.com, and if you use the code EBC75BB, you'll save $75 off your electric brewing purchase. That's at highgravitybrew.com. Okay, this show's a little longer than usual, but there is a lot of ground to cover. Mike and Kevin were very generous with their time and advice. Mike Mathis, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Now, where are we and who we got with us?
We are currently at the lodge at Cascade Brewing in Portland, Oregon, and with us we have Kevin Martin, our lead blender.
Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks for coming in.
And we have usual suspects here, Steve Wilkes.
How you doing?
And Bob Stimsky.
Hello.
And we have in front of us, should we take a sip and talk about what we just... it's 10 o'clock in the morning. I can't wait to get started on sour beers. So, Mike, maybe you tell us about this beer as we're tasting, and then we can get started.
Yeah, totally. Not a problem. This would be the 2016 Creek, our Northwest sour ale that is barrel-aged and soured in barrel with many, many thousands of pounds of Bing cherries. Mm.
Oh, my goodness. And so, Kevin, you've done some blending on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we start with about 50 oak barrels that are aged in oak barrel for several months. Once we get a good sour on them, then we'll transfer them into a stainless fruit tank and actually, as Mike said, add Bing cherries as well as sour pie cherries to that, and employ some winemaking techniques to really get good flavor extraction and color and aroma extraction out of the cherries. Continue to age that, and then do a final blend before we package. So it's quite a long journey to get to the glass here, but we think it's well worth it.
It's amazing. The depth of the flavor is wonderful. It's got a nice malt backbone to go along with it, so it's kind of like a cherry pie kind of a thing. But then it's nice and tart. but at the same time not too sour. It's nicely balanced. It's delicious.
Yeah, I made my first intentional sour a crick. So it's kind of neat. I was very proud of it, but now that I have this one, hey, it's not as good. That's for sure.
That's the danger.
Bob's up a creek without a fooder. That's why Steve's here. Yeah, right. This is great beer. What I really like is how you captured the cherries and even captured a little bit of that tannic quality that you expect to get from wine or even just from eating cherries. But you kept it in the beer, and I really like that.
Are the cherries pitted, or how are they treated?
So we actually do both pitted and non-pitted. So primarily with our Bing, we're doing a light crush on them, keeping the pits in. And then when we get our sour pies in, those are actually pitted. We will bring in some pits off to the side, actually keep them separate. There is a flavor profile in the pit that we really enjoy that's a spice note. It's almost got like a clove or cinnamon pie spice, baking spice note to it. It's very interesting. And there's some stone fruit character there as well. We've done some experimentations just to kind of infuse a beer with pits only, just for our own internal use, just to understand what that contribution is and to what degree we want it in our beer. So by pitting the sour pies, we actually have the ability to control that element. We of course want the fruit, the flesh of the fruit to really shine through in the beer as the primary focus point. But there are elements to pits that really contribute a flavor profile that we think gives a lot of complexity to the beer.
Wow. You don't think about that, or I don't think about that kind of thing. But yeah, I guess every element, the skin, the flesh, the pit, everything brings different elements to the party.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that understanding that, I mean, it's taken a lot of years of experimentation, development, trying to separate components in order to understand how each of these components play together. And we do the best we can to express it in the glass. But we also are trying to get out of the way of Mother Nature. I mean, if we get a specific, hot year or cool year, and that changes the acid profile or that changes the amount of sugars, which might convert into alcohol, we aren't going to try to manipulate that for consistency. We're actually encouraging year-to-year variation, and which is why we feel that putting a project year on our beers is so important. So as Mike said, this is the 2016 project. So these cherries were harvested in 2016. And so working backwards from there, the beer that went into this would have been 8 months old, 10 months old roughly when the cherries came in. So we would have brewed that beer likely late 2015.
Wow. So you mentioned wine elements or wine techniques. I mean, that's really an extension of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and winemaking techniques are crucial to our blending process. We work with whole fruit. We work with a lot of fresh fruit. And processes that some people may be familiar with, punch downs, actually pushing the cap that forms at the top of a ferment, actually using basically giant plungers to push that back down into the beer, or pump overs where we're actually recirculating beer from the bottom of the tank over the top of the tank so that it actually filters through that cap that forms during fermentation. Our object is to really keep that cap wet and sunk down into the beer because as you know, CO2 is produced during ferment, and that will actually lift the solids up out of the fermentation. So if you're not careful, you can dry out your cap. There's always potential for Acetobacter to grow and kind of turn it vinegary. So the more we can keep that cap submerged under the liquid, keep beer circulating over top during the ferment, that's going to help us get as much extraction and flavor as we can. Of course, once ferment starts to die off, we have to stop those practices and seal up the tank so that we don't overexpose it to oxygen.
Yeah, that was my next question. If you're recirculating, you got to make sure that you're circulating in a non-oxygen environment, I'm assuming.
Yes, so when the ferment is early, when there's a lot of sugars available, there's a lot of active yeast consuming the sugars that have been introduced from the fruit, we know that oxygen is going to get absorbed by the yeast that's active. So early in the ferment, it's okay. We actually can control, using that pump over technique, we can control the amount of splashing that might occur, the amount of oxygen exposures that might occur. But as we're monitoring the Play-Doh, that we're actually monitoring how much sugar we get out of the fruit. How does that raise the Play-Doh in the beer? And then we're watching it return back down to the original gravity level of the beer, or sometimes even lower with a little more contribution of alcohol. So, monitoring that and having some idea of where we think it's going to finish will guide us in terms of when to stop the pump overs or punch downs, so that we don't oxygenate or oxidize the beer unnecessarily.
So, Mike, as head brewer, is your role to produce the clean beer that then you transfer over to Kevin to work his side of the equation?
Yeah, that's my mission here, to make sure that all the stuff that we produce in-house at the brewery goes over there, and we can, depending on what we use it for, if we want to express malt in a sour beer blend, or if we want to express fruit, we have different recipes based on that and what we're trying to do. And that's my thing, as amongst many other things.
So talk about the base beer in this one.
So this, for our Creek, we use our reds, and that's roughly 16 Play-Doh reds. With our reds, we do use aged hops, stored cool, and that's specific to our reds. And with that, we've definitely done. I've really been interested in trying to build these grain bills and malt bills to actually be the cleanest they can be possible. Because downstream, specifically for Creek, we want the cherry to shine, but also it is nice to be able to have a showcase of a little bit of malt presence there. I mean, we still know we're drinking beer, and I think that pays homage to that. And with the Creek, we're a little less like crystal focused. There's definitely a crystal in there, obviously, for a red, but not as strong as we would do with some of our stuff that's not going to see any fruit whatsoever. That way, the idea is that we're producing beer that's going to be in a barrel, roughly 5 quarters. So we want that beer to have the best expression, fruited or not, whatever we need it for. We need all that to show up proper that far down the road. So yeah, building those out, it's fun, and I spend a lot of time working on malt sensory beforehand, and also being familiar with where our beer goes in 5 quarters in terms of flavor dynamics and what I'm tasting, and if I can pick up certain things or not later. It's truly a weird development. It's not your typical 2-week turnaround, 2.5-week turnaround, and then realizing that I should have used a different malt. Like, this is definitely downstream planning.
So if we were to taste this base beer, is it one base beer, or is it more than one base beer before that it's actually being blended into this process? And if we were to taste this beer as it leaves this facility, what would we be impressed that it's a good beer, or would we think it's lacking something?
Yeah, so to start out, I mean, obviously, Kevin and say it's about like 50 barrels or so. So we're going to turn around, and with that base beer, it's all 16 Play-Doh Red. So we're going to be turning out numerous brews of that like length, just to be able to hit the amount that we need for them to mix in all the fruit, and then they're going to go in and blend in more reds that may vary depending on the profile of a barrel on the other side, of an oak barrel, that is. So the majority of the time, it's all the same base beer brewed through, and we keep it that way, that we've nailed down that profile. We produce all the beers in here as non-sour beers, so that fermentation is done with the Belgian yeast strain that we use. And aside from, a higher sort of like finishing gravity that we have on these, I definitely think you would be able to taste them off the fermenter and understand that it's a pretty still dynamic beer. We aren't trying to push esters with the Belgian strain, but we do like the characteristics that it imparts. I think, if you were familiar with the grains, you'd probably be able to maybe pick them up or be in the wheelhouse of close to where they are. And I think between our separations of like reds that we do for fruit and reds that we don't do for fruit, I think you would definitely notice a difference there, but a very nice difference overall. I mean, we still regardless of if we're going to go put it in a barrel and let it sour for a year, we still really want to focus on the best balanced beer to go over to the other side. And that's the thing. We're putting all this work into fruit and using good oak and all this technique. We can't sacrificing on the grain or anything on any other ingredients is just going to be it's going to be unfortunate. We don't want that to show up down the line. So
I still have some in mind because I've been talking, but as it's warming up, the oak character really is coming through, and it's really nice. So talk about we've touched on it a little bit, but here we are at this facility, and you've got two facilities in this production. So talk about the kind of the background of this place and what its role is and what the other is.
Totally. Originally, this started out as the sole brewery and the sole location for Cascade Brewing. And we did non-sour beers predominantly. That's actually pretty much all we did. And then as we grew into doing sour barrel-aged beer, or barrel-aged sour beer, I should say, we realized that there's not a ton of space down there to store a lot of barrels. And trying to work in a facility where you're still producing non-sour beer and then practicing and also growing into a sour production facility in the same place is not really good when you're actually trying to produce good clean beer. And I think overall being able to manage and mitigate any sort of cross-contamination regardless of, even working with 2 yeast strains and not even including bacteria, I think is pivotal in the dynamic of everything. So now we function solely as like the brewery here. Everything, 2 yeast strains, everything's clean here. And then we grew into a separate, the barrel house that's over on southeast Portland. And that's actually where the original, like where we had our blending facility and we stored our barrels, and outgrew that place. And about a mile from here, we have our blending house facility, which is nice. So we basically, once we've reached terminal gravity and we've had that beer chilled for at least 5 days in the fermenter, we will barrel the beer down into barrel and transfer that by truck over to our blending house facility. So not only is it nice to have a closer facility, we don't have to transport like the beer as far, which is good, and then we also don't have to deal with the same traffic trying to get into Portland. So, I mean, it's a win-win in terms of transferring beer in truck via barrel.
So do you make Kevin wear a clean suit if he goes in the brew house here? Does he, have to put on like a onesie with the?
I have not done that, but I think I will definitely. I'll definitely pick one of those up just for fun.
I'll probably do for a delicing here.
You're like the Andromeda strain, where there are several different series of decontamination that he has to go through. So I take it the blending house or the other side is your territory. So what is that correct? And what would we see if we walked in over there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's always a team effort. It takes a lot of people, a lot of working parts to make these beers. But at the blending house, when you walk in, the first thing you'll see is a right in the center of the facility is a mass pile of about 1,700 oak barrels. Off to your right, you'll see 9 fooders. All have different types of base beer, triples, blondes, strong blondes, reds, double reds. And then towards the back of the facility, you'll see our tank farm, where we have 1 row of strictly dedicated fruit tanks. These are essentially wine fermenters that are designed. They have outward swinging doors in order to easily remove large loads of compost of spent fruit. They've got manways on the top of the tank so that we can actually access the top to add fruit and to perform our pump overs. So we do have a unique line of tanks. I mean, that's contrary to a lot of typical brewing tanks where the doors actually seal from the inside and are meant to hold higher pressures for carbonation. These tanks are not meant for that purpose. So that really enables us to make these beers, and our facility is specifically designed for this style of beer. Along the other side of the tank farm, we'll have actually our blending tanks and packaging tanks. So we have 1 large 180-barrel blending tank. That's our primary blending tank for our largest blends. We have a very small module filter. It's very coarse filtration. We aren't actually removing any yeast or bacteria. It's strictly a nice visual polish on the beer. Because these are barrel-aged beers with fruit, they can be a bit muddy before filtration, so we want to just polish them up, make them look nice and clear in the glass. And then we will send them to our packaging tanks, and we usually divide our single blend into 2 tanks, one for bottling and one for kegging. The kegs we typically force carbonate, and the bottles we do all bottle conditioning. After the tank farm, you'll see our bottling line, which is actually designed for champagne. It's a non-counter-pressure system, so we can only do still beers. So we do dose yeast and sugar into the tanks on bottling day, and then send it to through the bottling machine and into our warm conditioning room. It takes us anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks to condition our bottles typically, and then they come out, and then we have several different docks and warehousing just for keg storage, empty barrel storage, finished goods storage, all those exciting things that any home brewer or professional brewer know that you need a decent amount of space to store all that stuff.
Yeah, we used to have a basement.
Exactly.
So these beers are live, so that industrious homebrewers could, resource this as a source for bugs.
Sure, it could be done. There's no doubt about that. I think that if somebody were to, say, take the dregs of a Cascade bottle and prop it up, what they're going to find is primarily champagne yeast is going to be the dominant, because that's our bottle conditioning strain. So that's going to be, in terms of what's in the bottle, that's going to be the most populous yeast or bacteria in there. If it's a fruited beer, assuming it's like our Creek or our Apricot, something like that, there's going to be some wild bugs in there. I mean, we don't use pasteurized aseptic fruit. We're bringing in fruit whole in from the orchards. We might give them a light wash just to remove any dust or anything. But then otherwise, you might see some Brett, you might see lacto, you might see some pedio that all came in wild on this fruit. So it's going to be a mixed bag of bacteria there, and then there's going to be probably a high count of lactobacillus, which is our primary souring bacteria, which is the reason we try to sour our beers for several months before we even fruit them is to build a strong culture of lactobacillus. That gives us a really nice, clean flavor profile before the fruit comes in. So essentially we have a more or less controlled, lacto-focused souring process for the first half of the beer's life. Then its fruit is introduced, and then it kind of enters this, what I would refer to as like a semi-wild fermentation, where outside bugs are brought in, and we let those take their course.
So does the lower pH from that lactofermentation, does it guard against some things from the wild bugs on the fruit?
I think so. That by the time we're adding fruit, that beer has become a fairly harsh environment. Between the alcohol, which in our beers can range from 6.5% upwards to 12%. Obviously the pH is going to be fairly low, anywhere from 3.3 to 3.7, say. TA is going to typically be anywhere from 0.8 to 1.2%. It's a fairly high TA, total acidity, and so it really does create an environment where the only bugs that are really going to do well in that environment are those acidophiles that are actually going to work in a high acidic environment, which include the ones you would typically think about when it comes to sour beer production. So lactobacillus, Pediococcus, Brettanomyces, and Acetobacter. We do the best that we can to keep Acetobacter at bay. So we're very conscientious of avoiding oxygen ingress in any part of our process. Mike, we have another beer.
Yes. This would be our 2017 Apricot that we just released about 2 weeks ago. It's the same process. We're looking at roughly 12,000 pounds, Kevin, or 15.
I think it was about 13.
13.
Right in that range.
Right in the middle. Yeah, 13,000 pounds of whole apricots that we break down by hand, all locally from within about within 100 miles.
Yeah, it's Washington, Central Washington. Yeah.
It's cheating having all this fruit close by.
And I think that's the one thing that brewing in Portland is always nice, just because we do have a lot at our fingertips. Great water profile, hops. There's malt locally too, and then the fruit. And then having the Willamette Valley wines right in our backyard as well. Access to oak. But I mean, we got to deal with a lot of rain, so it's really tough up here.
You don't want to come out here. You don't want to come out this way.
Every time I come out, my son goes to the University of Washington at Seattle, and every time we come up, it's like 75 and sunny. So I'm beginning to question, and it's a beautiful day outside today. So
I think it's going to rain.
So this beer, to me, I mean, it's very cloudy, but to me, it's more tart than the Creek. But still the fruit comes through, not as strongly as the cherry flavor in the Creek, but still it's very nice and kind of fresh tasting, even though it's been around for a long time. It's interesting. But the tartness is very nice, and it's very drinkable at the same time.
Yeah, I got to be careful here. It's very puckery, and I think I would love to have this with a sandwich, because then you wouldn't have to have a pickle.
Barbecue is really good. I smoke a lot of meat at home, and I was actually talking with Aaron Franklin about this, and he's a huge fan of sour beer, but it's nice to be able to have that, those rich meats and that level of smoke, but then you take a sip of a nice balanced sour beer, and it's the same thing. You have that acidity to break that down, clean your palate, and take another bite, and that next bite is just like the first bite. Mm-hmm. So, and as much as I can incorporate sour beer into barbecue, I'm working on that as well.
That's right up Steve's alley.
Yeah, no kidding. It's delicious. It captures the fruit very well, and I don't know, just to echo kind of what you guys have already covered. I mean, it's just nice and crisp and tart and refreshing. I drink a lot of this.
But still, the mouthfeel is there. I mean, it's got a nice body to it. It's not thin. It's not, vinegary or it is a substantial beer. So whatever tricks you use to keep those, those sugars in there or that body in there, it's working. So talk about the malt, or let's talk about the base beer from this one, Mike.
Yeah, so for this beer, we're looking more at our blonde series, and with our blondes, definitely more traditional, like Belgian blonde. We're focusing on all pale malts, and I think one thing that we haven't really touched on yet is that our mash regime for all of our sour beers is that we're doing step mashing, and we're doing protein rest, and we're taking it up with like higher saccharification temperatures, and we're actually working to develop more of this like rounded sort of like brew going into the tank. We're trying to do everything we can, regardless of what our malt spec sheets say, and what science tells us, and we understand. But we're trying to stick to what we've been doing, and we want to keep it that way, so that way we can set this beer up to go age well and then be able to stand up when we do add the fruit. I think with our blonde series, it's nice to be able to showcase our different fruits. They stand up differently, and it's the same thing with like our wheat beers as well. And we're able to kind of like work with more. But even with this malt bill, we went through a lot of trials, and even different German malts have different things that we picked up in sensory, and we try to clean that up to be able to put forth a better product that we felt represented the beer. So, I mean, it's a constant development, and we've definitely switched around different malts to make sure that there's no artifacts that we're picking up in sensory that don't show up later down the road with the beer.
So what impact do non-barley malts and adjuncts, what do they bring to the table? I think you mentioned wheat.
Yeah.
And do you ever use oats or
Yeah. Okay. So on that topic, for wheats, we actually with our wheats we're making a lower Plato beer in general. So I think it's nice to be able to have a wheat, kind of give it a little more like robust mouthfeel. Even though down the road we are looking at like something to dry out a little bit more, and it's a lower ABV in any lower ABV beer. any small beer, you're always battling to balance out mouthfeel and flavor. And I do that with the non-sours here all the time because I thoroughly enjoy them because it's so much more challenging. And so we use that, and then we actually do a spice rye that we produce pretty frequently for one of our best-selling draft beers, Honey and Ginger Lime. And that spiced rye, I mean, who doesn't like rye? Actually, I know plenty of people do, but I don't like them. And that's where we're trying to develop that level of spice to go through on a beer that's been back sweetened with honey, and we have some other flavors going on in there as well. So we don't find it, oats and stuff. We're not really using too many oats, I think. Yeah, no. Even we have a smoked wheat base as well, and the wheat, and that's again a lower ABV beer. And I think just a little bit of that extra punch from the wheat is really carrying us. We're not looking for a ton of that down the line. Plenty of Belgian candy sugar in our higher ABV beers. Yeah, and we've actually used a few different sugars to help on some of our imperials or our like quads and stuff like that, which not all sugar is created equally, and I obviously for flavor reasons, but there's a lot of exotic, I say loosely because they're not really exotic, but they're not you're not always finding them at your local brew shop or whatever. But we were playing around with some other sugars, and we were noticing some horrible fermentation pH shifts and really bad and unpredictable fermentations with pHs and stuff, and we tracked it down to a specific type of sugar, and I think that's one of those things is like you don't really realize it until you're using it, and then at that point, granted the flavor of the sugar is amazing, and what it could do on a beer that fermented well was awesome, but when we ran into pH shifts and like lagging and stalling fermentations where we have data that they shouldn't be doing that, especially with great yeast, we kind of have to stop doing that and still do what's best for the beer. And lots of variances and stuff like that. But the sugar's not all the same aside from flavor. That's one thing I definitely know. But I feel like every ingredient, much to the same way our fruit changes year to year with how it grows. You know what I mean? We can only do what we can with our hands and our minds, and then the rest is left up to, like Kevin said, Mother Nature. So, strangely enough.
And here we are in hop country. So you don't only do sours, right?
Right. Yeah, we do non-sours as well. I personally am a huge fan of hops. I started homebrewing in San Diego, and this was in like 2007, and I love hops. I love IPAs. I also love sour beer as well. But yeah, I try and showcase the hop profiles the best we can, and put out. Our sours are amazing, and I try and back that up with non-sours just as well. Because not everyone's into sours, and we have multiple locations where people can come and drink. And I mean, as long as they got a craft beer in their hand, I'm good with that. You don't have to like sours. I would like you to try them because one day you might, but hopefully there's something else on our non-sour list that you'll be able to drink. And I think that's a testament just to be able to say, hey, at Cascade, we're trying to put our best foot forward in everything we put out there for folks, which I'm sure a lot of people are doing that everywhere else as well.
Well, Steve and Bob are ahead of me again. But Kevin, talk about your source of barrels. I mean, you said you have dedicated fooders, but then do you use new barrels or used barrels, or talk about your barrels?
Sure. Well, the answer is all of the above. We welcome all barrels in our cellar. We're a very inclusive cellar, in that way. But so as Mike touched on, we have the great benefit of being right at the doorstep of the Willamette Valley wine region, which is a huge Pinot Noir and Chardonnay producing area. There's another number of other varietals that are grown here, but those are really the two big players. So, I come from a winemaking background. We've had other people on our staff that have come from winemaking backgrounds as well. So we have the benefit of having good contacts, winemakers who can give us a call when they're emptying a lot of barrels that they want to get rid of. They can give us a call, and we can have a truck there, within hours of emptying if we coordinate it right. If you come into our cellar, it's a pretty safe bet that about 80%, vast majority of our barrels are going to be come from Pinot Noir or Chardonnay production, and we do beer and barrel selection, pairing based on flavor profile. So Chardonnay works great with our blonde ales, triples. Pinot Noir works great with our red ales, double reds. Just as an example. Beyond that, we do work with some coopers to buy fresh oak barrels that have not had any previous contents in them, and we've been doing some pretty extensive research on French oak versus American oak as it pertains to sour beer aging, or medium toast, medium plus toast, and heavy toast. Or we even have some experimentation with acacia wood heads on some barrels. We play around with different formats. We've got some 300-liter cognac barrels. We've got some 500-liter fresh oak barrels, and Chardonnay, essentially puncheons is what we would refer to them as, those large format oaks. And then we bring in bourbon barrels, obviously from Kentucky. As I mentioned, brandy barrels from cognac. We've worked with rum barrels coming out of the Caribbean. We haven't had those in a while, but certainly not out of the running for the future. We've worked with tequila barrels. Occasionally, if we want to do something with a little bit more robust, more jammy, rich, dark fruit, we might bring in Zinfandel barrels or Cab barrels, Cabernet Sauvignon barrels from California. So it really is determined by what are our goals in terms of, we have to plan 1, 2, even 3 years out, and we'll plan our barrel buying based off of that. We certainly get a lot of uses out of our barrels. We find there's a lot of value in knowing the status of a barrel. Is it new, second use, third use, fourth? Has it had fruit in it before? What type of fruit? We know if we add ginger, we have one of our popular draft beers is our honey ginger lime. If you add ginger and lime to a barrel, that is forevermore a ginger limey barrel. That's never going to get out of there. So we dedicate those for that project. So we mark them accordingly, and we fill them with the spiced rye beer that Mike was talking. That's the base beer for that project. So some barrels become very singular in their use. Other barrels are extremely diverse. But we do track them. We grade them based on how many times they've been filled. And but it really just like the fruit, just like the base beer, the oak is a part of this flavor profile. I mean, there's so many aspects that go into building these beers, and oak is definitely one of the top considerations on how we want to build a blend.
I'm curious about this beer because, and you guys, well, Bob's moved even one.
I don't waste my time.
I'm tasting a honey sweetness to this beer, and there's a little bit of nut in there just on my palate, and it's difficult when you're tasting flights of strongly flavored beers that all kinds of things start to layer in. But this is definitely it's still tart, but it's got a sweetness to it that was not in the others. So what do we got here, Mike?
Yeah, so this is actually our honey teacot. So you're definitely there with the honey.
Props to me.
Yeah, you nailed it. No, and we kind of mentioned the honey ginger lime, and I think that's another thing that we kind of are able to, this works on multiple levels, but we have access to a lot of really good local honey up here. We start out with a beer that's already obviously sour, and we're able to kind of integrate honey in a different way that we're not really as focused on like fermentation or hot side or all these other additions, but we're actually able to use this honey as a blending tool to showcase honey. And then on top of that, we actually added more. We've worked with honey extensively, but also the fact that like being able to work with honey and build additional flavors with other like spice additions, tea additions. Honey ginger lime obviously isn't just honey, but the ginger and the lime. So we're balancing acidity with more acidity, spiciness characteristic from the ginger, and then sweetness as well to make these like other products. And honey teacot was one of them, where we have a beer called honeycot, which we take our apricot and then we back blend that with honey as well. Which we actually have on Nitro over at our pub in Southeast currently. And then this was roughly that same proportion, but we actually went in and we added these tea infusions to it as well.
What kind of tea?
Actually, I'll let I don't want to butcher them because like I know them, but I just want to make sure it's said right. So I'll let Kevin take on that one.
Sure. Well, we work with a local tea smith in town that provided us with this is actually a blend of teas. It's black tea, green tea, and a smoked green tea. So the smoked one we used with a pretty surgical hand because we didn't want it to become a smoky tea, or we certainly didn't. Sometimes if you incorporate too many flavors, you start to lose the focus of the beer. But yeah, as Mike mentioned, this starts as a base of essentially honeycott blonde ales with apricots and honey, and then we did separate infusions of black, green, and smoked green, and then we blended those three components to find the nice balance of a tea-based beer, and then blended that with our apricot. So we sort of have blending that precedes the next step of blending. So sometimes there's pretty circuitous paths to get to the glass here.
Well, it's interesting because tea is often used as a descriptor, as a defect, because it's an astringency or people say that there's a tea character. So with these kinds of beers, it would be you have to strike a balance where too much tea would go in the wrong direction, or but it's done well. Is the beer stabilized before the honey is put in there, or how is the honey still so prominent?
So,
or am I asking trade secrets? You don't have to give trade secrets.
No. I mean, we want to share the experience of what we're doing here. I think it enlivens and enriches the experience of drinking the beer. To be honest with you, so what we take and Mike has really become a force when it comes to honey knowledge in the industry. So I'll leave the specific honey questions to him. But in terms of the process, we're essentially back sweetening. So once we have a finished blend of the apricot and the teas, the last step is really to infuse honey. We're just kind of using a little bit of warm water to lubricate it, make it a little more easily infused into the beer, and send it in. Our honey infusions can be anywhere between 1/4 pound per gallon up to 1/2 pound per gallon, depending on how acidic the beer. We're talking. It's very difficult to pinpoint exactly where you want it to be because the acidity of our beers shift, and so to us, the target in a beer is not necessarily 0.275 pounds per gallon. It's how acidic is this beer, and how much sweetness is required to balance that. And that can change with each and every blend. So we're using sensory to guide us, and we observe what those numbers are in our labs to inform us. But we're making decisions based on sensory. So, but in terms of the stability of these beers, it would be what we would consider an unstable product in that. If this keg was left out at room temperature, that honey could potentially begin to ferment. Now, that said, you won't find these beers anywhere else but our pubs. We don't take the risk of distribution of a back-sweetened beer. So, we on our keg collars we write big and bold, "Keep cold," do not remove from cooler. And we've trained our pub staff to know that these beers need to be handled with care and respect. As a matter of safety and and maintaining the integrity of the beer, we've had zero incident. As long as these are kept cold, they really stabilize, remain exactly where we left them when we filled the kegs. Currently we're not doing any bottle packaging of these products simply for that reason. We would have to look into pasteurization, or sterile filtration, which is, I think it's an area that's of interest to us, worth exploring, but at the moment it's not part of our practice.
Yet another variable to add into the equation. Sounds like you've got enough to worry about at this point. So, Bob, do you remember the previous beer?
Yes, I do. I thought it was really neat because after the shock of the apricot, when I got this one, my brain was going back and forth. Sweet, sour, and it actually added something and made my sensories kind of perk up, and I really liked it. It was very good. You did a good job.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's terrific. I picked up that kind of raw honey in the nose that was really nice. And a lot of times you'll hear mead makers in particular talk about, oh, you don't want that raw honey. But it was nice because it really, really smelled like honey that you get, in the summertime, and it's a little warm, and that's a good smell.
Yeah, I'm always worried when we do these tastings. I'm like, am I going to taste what the brewer intended? Am I going to pick up these things? But in that one, I really did. I'm going to say that I didn't think tea, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe because sometimes you blend in ingredients that you don't want to punch you in the face with oak. Here's a table leg on the head. But you blend it in as an ingredient to make a balance or to bring certain characteristics or to highlight, like they put vanilla in chocolate bars. Mm-hmm. You don't taste vanilla necessarily, but it's in there.
Yeah, and we try to look at the beers that we produce as a portfolio, as a catalog, a body of work, and maybe that's a little bit too hyper focused on what we're doing, but we try to be deliberate. Sometimes we want a beer to just whack you over the head with a flavor. Sometimes we want subtlety and nuance. We like to range, to make beers that fall within that entire spectrum, from subtle. Sometimes we just want to feature the base beer. I mean, what's coming out of the brewery is such a phenomenal product on its own. Sometimes we ask ourselves, why are we even attempting to manipulate this? This is a great product. So, if you look at blends like our Sang Rouge or Sang Duchesne, this is respectively a sour blonde and a sour red beer, those have no fruit, no spice. It's just wood and beer. I think our apricot, I don't think anybody would say that, the apricot is subtle in that beer. But we do make other beers. Our Figaro, we use fig and citrus peel. And fig is a delicate fruit, and we try to represent that in a beer and have a very kind of delicate flavor profile. So, I mean, it really just depends on what our goal and focus is. But sometimes we want those X factors that, we add something and, you just can't pinpoint what it is, but it's something is there, and we like a little bit of mystery in some of our beers. And like I said, other times we just want a giant flashing red light that says cherry. It just depends on what we're looking for.
This new, we have a new beer. Or it's not new to Bob. He's been on it a while. But I just took a sip. I'm gonna Steve, I'm gonna let you go first on this one.
It's delicious. I think it has the softest palate of the flight that we've done so far. I don't know if it's a fruited beer or not. It tastes like peaches to me, so I don't know if it is. I'm kind of making that up, but it does. It get kind of a soft peach aroma, and then actually in the nose, it's pretty funky. It's got that good funk, that good Belgian funk.
Well, I have to say what he said, so I have to cheat because it is very mild compared to the other ones. I mean, the apricot really knocked me on my butt, but this is very good too. But I really can't pick anything out. I mean,
I'm gonna. This is the most sort of, or the least challenging from a sour perspective, in my opinion. And I'm gonna jump right out there and say lime. Yeah. Am I wrong?
I will definitely say there's not lime added.
Oh.
I would definitely say there's not peaches added. And putting this sort of like abrupt flight together, I really wanted to showcase, a lot of we looked at the Creek and the apricot and sort of our traditional, our beers that we're pretty well known for. The honey teacot I think is interesting because it emphasis on our blending and our working with ingredients to kind of put stuff together. And then this one is actually our Pear Posterous, 2017 Pear Posterous, the collaboration with Upland. So I think the irony with this one is that it's literally pears and pawpaws. And I think, if you've never heard of pawpaw, then you're probably wondering what's going on and is that an actual animal or not. And then also I think there's a level of and Kevin touched on it. We did these fermentations in Fruit Tank separate. So we were fortunate enough to understand both of these products in our beer. before we combined them, and they're truly dynamic. And I think the general consensus with staff, probably like 95% of the staff, thought that the Paw re-fermentation on the sour beer was absolutely insane and great and delicious and tropical. So you do pick up some of this like tropical characteristic in the beer that comes through, and I think that there's like the high level of like sorbitol that was picked up in the pears, and like some of this other like very earthy characteristic from the pears come through in a different fashion. But it's nice to see the sort of dynamic that unless you had the bottle in front of you or you were reading what you were drinking, you probably wouldn't nail it right there. And I think that's great, because that was the first time we've ever put the two and two together and worked with these fruits at this like level. We'd never done something that big. We'd done a Paw live barrel before, but to have like this concentration of fruit, this much beer at stake, crossing our fingers that it was going to come out good. And I think it's one of those things where if you don't know, that's totally fine because it tastes good. But if you know, to really understand, like, wow, I didn't think that would happen. I mean, if you saw a Paw and you know what a Paw is, it's like that fruit just gave us what flavor? How did that happen?
Well, if you pick a Paw or a prickly pear, you might get a raw paw. So next time you wear Jungle Book reference. It is tropical, and I stand by the lime. I stand by that lime character.
Oh, totally.
It's almost like a key lime thing to me, and I've never had just a raw pawpaw. I don't know. Steve, do you have background in pawpaw knowledge?
A very little bit, but I think pawpaws are. We bought them you can buy them at the farmers market in Fayetteville, and I think you have to cook them. And there's like pawpaw bread, like zucchini bread, and you can make a pudding out of it. And I think you can. I don't know about eating them raw, but I think you'd have to cook them for a while, and then they soften. And then they're like, it's like an odd kind of fruit pudding, the way that they eat. Yeah, it's custard-like. Yeah. I just had them once or twice in my life, so I kind of get that. But I even stand by my peaches because, as I remember having Paw, it's kind of that nondescript peachy flavor. That's what I get from the beer. I still do.
Yeah.
So how do you handle a Paw, Kevin?
Well, for one, they were very difficult. In Oregon, they were very difficult to get our hands on. When we first contacted or essentially ran into the staff at Upland Brewing, if you're familiar with Upland Brewing out of Indiana, they have a fantastic sour program, and we've had a lot of respect for what they do for a while. They came out to Portland for CBC in, I think, 2014 or 15, I forget when that was. And we sort of made a plan to do a collaboration with them, but it took us a couple years to get it going, and then, of course, it took us yet another year to actually get the beer from kettle to glass. But knowing that we were going to work with an Indiana brewery, we knew that we were going to suddenly have access to a fruit that does not grow here, one of the few fruits that really doesn't grow well here in the Northwest. So that was our first request. Can you guys source pawpaws for us? And they worked really hard on their side to source them, because even in Indiana and Ohio, where they're grown, they're difficult to find in bulk. So the team in Upland did find a source for us, a local farmer who was able to even process them for us. Essentially, if you're not familiar with a pawpaw, it looks like a cross between a green banana and a mango, and when you cut it open, there are these big, stones, kind of black, like stone pits on the inside, and as they touched on, the fruit itself is like this custard, almost banana-like, substance, and so they were able to, it's very difficult to we did hand process pawpaws at one point for about a 50-gallon batch, and it took two guys about several hours to get through it, so we knew it wasn't viable to do on our side, but these farmers in Indiana, where we got them, actually had the means to properly extract the fruit out of from the skin and from the seeds. So so that made it really easy for us. That said, it was still a raw fruit material. It wasn't. We were not working with. It wasn't a puree or anything like that. It wasn't processed or sterilized. So they sent us pawpaw from Indiana. We sent them pear from Oregon. We got them out in just out by Hood River, closer, to more central Oregon, where it's a bit warmer. And both fruits, the flavor profiles you guys are talking about, the lime, the peach, it's all there. Pear in and of itself is a very subtle fruit. I mean, when you bite into a pear, it's not as intense as a lot of, for every gallon of, we worked with pear juice. We actually had the pears milled and pressed and worked with the juice itself like you would with white wine. It's a very subtle flavor. I mean, it's not as potent as even, say, like an apple juice or something. So when that fermented, as I was talking about earlier, it gave us subtlety and nuance. It's not, and some of those kind of citrus characters came out of it, some stone fruit characters, some of that apple, pear, Bartlett kind of flavor came out. But then we threw the pawpaws on top of that, and we got mango and pineapple and banana. So it really covers this whole spectrum of fruit types, and it's all, I feel, fairly balanced. Mike touched on the sorbitol, which is a sugar that's natural in pears that doesn't ferment, so it maintains some level of sweetness. And in fact, that's a trick I know some cider makers use if they want to back sweeten their ciders in a stable way. They'll add some pear juice and know that it won't attenuate quite as far as just straight apple juice might. But we did separate the two. We actually had a pawpaw ferment in one tank and a pear ferment in the other tank. And the pawpaws actually just took off. Very, very wild. We were looking at it in a scope. Very, very high cell counts of oblong wild yeast that wow. I mean, we didn't get them identified or anything, but we were really liking the direction that they went. The pear tank, in the meantime, was a little bit sluggish in taking off, and so what we wound up doing is taking a little bit, maybe about 30 gallons of that active pawpaw ferment, and just pitched that into the pear tank, and got those wild, Indiana bugs going in there in our
Hoosier
Oregon.
bugs.
Yeah, Hoosier bugs in our Oregon pear tank, and then that took right off, and then blending the two together was really. It was an easy blend to come together because the two tanks played really nicely. We just happened to hit our target on it, and target into being, we felt that there was a balance of flavors almost. Blend tank A with blend tank B, and that was our blend. And we, oftentimes we wind up saying, well, 80% of this tank with 100% of this tank, and then we've got 20% left over. In this case, it was almost a 1-for-1 blend.
Well, it's a fun beer. It's really fun, I can be talked into banana as well. It's just so much going on in there. It's fun. You guys have fun jobs. It must be inspiring to work in this kind of collaboration.
Yeah, it's always fun to kind of explore not only other areas of working with Upland. We were able to really in focus on using something else. And we used the pawpaws, whereas we did a collaboration last year that we released with Brewery to Rue in the Orange County area, and we had Meyer lemons shipped up from them, and we shipped down Marionberry. So once again, this sort of uncharted territory where our focus definitely is local backyard stuff, but if we can work with another sour producer that's doing beers in the same vein that we are, and we can also learn and grow, understand these other ingredients, and also sometimes it's just hey, I don't know where to get this stuff, do you? And they're like, oh, actually, yeah, we got a guy, and then but they're also just well, where can we get this? And we're like, oh, we got a guy, so we'll trade, so it's cool to be able to explore that. It's cool to be able to see our peers in the industry doing the same sort of stuff, and talking to them about process, and talking to them about just the little things, and it's fun to see this sort of spectrum, or this little area of craft beer that's focusing on sour and wilds, kind of growing and people working together, and also just like people recognizing that and people getting excited about it, and seeing people, do that at home or just like be more inquisitive. Like, it feels like you're doing your job right, I guess, or at least it seems to be that way.
More good beer for everybody.
Hopefully.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. We're out of beer, right? Or we're
Yeah.
out of samples,
Yeah.
or not samples, but
Unless you need
the
more.
beers themselves. Oh, we could always use some more. But Mike and Kevin and Steve and Bob, this has been a lot of fun, and this is only the first stop on our tour of Portland and around HomebrewCon. So, thanks, guys, for the hospitality.
Yeah, pleasure meeting you guys. Pleasure talking. I hope everyone enjoys it. Look for us on Cascade Brewing on Instagram, Cascade Brewing Barrel House, our pub as well, Cascade Brewing on Facebook, all the social media. Yeah, and the Lodge at Cascade Brewing as well. Feel free to reach out if you ever have any questions. We do our best to answer all questions that we can. This is all about spreading the knowledge and the information, I feel like. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Well, thanks again to Mike and Kevin. What a great time. That was the first interview of 3 that we did that day. After the interview, we ran into owner Art Lawrence when we were eating lunch upstairs, and we had a fun conversation off mic. I had a hoppy beer as a change of pace from the sours, and boy, it was delicious as well. And I can't remember what Bob had, but he had another sour, and it was good. It was delicious. I think it had like cacao nibs in it and stuff. I don't know. I'll have to look that up. Boy, it was tasty as well. Lots more stuff coming from Portland and HomebrewCon, so stay tuned for all that. In the meantime, if you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to James at basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way. Check all that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. Get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener with any DVD combo. You can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store as well. You can find our logbooks where you can track a log up to 50 batches of beer. Check all those out at basicbrewingshop.com. Also, take a look at our silicone pints. They're very cool. And don't forget you can join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate links at basicbrewing.com. It's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.